Katie LaFalcia, welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. Time for our Saturday book, video number 3, A New Science of Heaven by Robert Temple. Very well received book. Everybody seemed to just love it. It's fascinating. Denise and I are going to have a conversation about it on Sunday, all things being equal. And if you haven't had a chance to watch her video she made yesterday on problems in transportation, trains, airplanes, etc., because of Uranus in the third house, I don't know. You need to watch it because she posted that yesterday, and today there was another train derailment in Washington State. Okay, with a spill. And I just did a video because it's not really Saturday, it's Friday, because I have to work. So I have to maneuver the schedule a little bit. But we're going to pretend it's Saturday, but it's really Friday and it's St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day. And I did a card reading, finally, on potential indictments for Trump. And you might want to take a peek at that. The outcome at the very end, very interesting. Okay, so let's get going. Chapter 9. The cold sun. You heard that right, the cold sun. So the sun is not, now this is the book on plasma physics. And he is discussing discoveries, just to update everybody. He's discussing discoveries that are not necessarily in the mainstream dialogue all the time. Most people, I've been asking people, most people have never heard of any of this. But this is accepted science by the real scientists. The sun is not a hot, fiery ball of burning gas powered by an internal hydrogen bomb. And I asked my husband, who's a science nerd, before I said anything to him, I said, okay, what do you know about the sun? And that's kind of exactly what he said, which is a far better description he gave me than I would have been able to come up with on my own. But when I described to him what I'd read in this book, he was really surprised. And he's somebody who keeps up on science, but this is just not well known. There is sort of an unofficial curtain over all of this, which we're going to get to. But the sun is cold. The sun itself is cold. Now, the photosphere, this is the surface. It's not really on the surface, but it's what surrounds the sun, is 5,500 centigrade degrees. That's pretty hot. Too hot for humans, but that's not the sun. That's kind of like, I'm going to use the word atmosphere. That's not the correct term, but it's a layer around the sun. The photosphere is not even 4 times as hot as a cement kiln, and it is a third as hot as the electrons in a neon office bulb, the inside of the sun. So what we're talking about, when you turn on a neon light, you can hold it and it feels cold, but the reaction going on in there, what's happening, is a plasma thing, and it's enormously hot. But okay, how'd that happen? So if you enter the sunspot, which is really like a giant open mouth, the farther in you go, the cooler it gets. They have sent probes up to measure this, so this is documented. It does not have a giant thermonuclear reaction going on at its core, which is what we were all taught. The real heat of the sun is really heat coming from far above the sun in what we call the corona meaning crown. Its lowest temperature is 2 million degrees centigrade. No one is sure of the highest upper limit of it. Some say it might even be 6 million degrees. It's kind of warm. So even the lowest temperature of the corona is 350 times hotter than what you would call the surface of the sun. So the sun is not necessarily solid that has like a crust that you could stand on. So they use the word surface advisedly. The closest that this corona, this hot thing, comes to the sun's surface is 1,300 miles. And the Earth exists within the corona of the sun. Although lately at my house, you wouldn't know it. Today, finally, it's not raining. It's a miracle. So the corona is an inferno, and it's called the chromosphere. And inside of it, 60 miles in, this transition starts with the temperature going down. And you get from the chromosphere, then the photosphere, and it's not solid, he reiterates this, and then you get into the sun, and as you get closer to the what would be called the core, it gets cooler and cooler and cooler. Now remember, cool is relative, but it's not what we think. The heat of a thermonuclear explosion is much higher. But most astrophysicists still claim that a thermonuclear reaction is going on at the center, and this is not possible because we have proof that as you get closer to the center, it gets colder. So those two things are impossible to be both true. So why are the sunspots dark? They're holes. They know this now. Those are holes, and they're dark, which would imply nothing bright inside. And when something burns, it lets off light. So why are they dark? Can only think that it's cold and dark. So really, the sun is cold and dark on the inside. Now, the solar wind, which is the expulsion of plasma from the sun, combined with charged particles, it picks up dust and it creates some of its own dust generated by its plasma. This fills the entire solar system. It flows over the Earth constantly, and it's largely diverted by the Van Allen belts, the magnetosphere. We've seen illustrations of that. So it sort of goes around it and off into the cosmos, but some of it does get through. In 1977, a paper was written where a satellite, talking about the satellite, shows that this whole process is a 4 billion year process. In 1999, the solar wind stopped for 2 days. Nobody knows why. In 1999, any heat or energy that would come from a solar thermonuclear explosion would take 200,000 years to radiate from the sun's core to the sun's surface. It's an explosion at the core of the sun, and if this is true, and they're postulating arguments against it being a thermonuclear explosion. If an explosion happened at the core of the sun and it was going on today, it would be felt in the year 202,017. Every 2 minutes and 40 seconds, the sun shrinks and expands by 6 miles. So every 2 minutes and 40 seconds, the sun does this, like a pulse, or like respiration. Is this a fusion process with lungs? And there's just, I have all these question marks and exclamation points, because that's basically how he leaves it, is like, what? What's going on? The sun spews positive charges, and when it gets too many, it pauses and it recharges as electrons pour into it from the Birkeland currents. So this continual inflow of negative charges expels the positive charges. This creates the solar wind. So you've got negative coming in, positive going out. So this is the electric sun theory, and there would be no need for a core explosion and no need for what's called neutrinos. And a viewer suggested a video, and I looked at it. I forgot to go back and watch the whole rest of it. It's almost an hour long, and it's a physicist. I think he's a physicist. Maybe he's not a physicist. Well, I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched the first maybe 5 minutes of it, and I had to leave. But it's fascinating, and I will try to write down that name. And if you're the viewer who recommended it, recommend it again in the comments so I don't have to search. Thank you. And I will refer to it so people can find it. He talks about the electric, was it the electric sun theory? Yeah, the electric sun theory, which is this negative, positive, negative, positive. So I hope I didn't butcher that too much. This makes your head hurt. There's a lot here. Don't feel overwhelmed like you're the only one. I think this blows everybody's minds, and it blows everybody's minds so much that famous scientists don't even want to really talk about it or think about it. But these are, keep in mind, Nobel Prize winning astrophysicists, chemists, physicists, engineers who have developed these theories. These are not fringe people. Chapter 10, The Invisible Earth. In 1958, Van Allen, the guy they named the belts after, he made a discovery by satellite. The solid Earth as we know it is surrounded by an invisible Earth of plasma. We just live in the core. The solid Earth ball that you can see from the sky, is actually the core of a larger living entity. And around us, and we're not talking just the atmosphere, we're talking plasma that's part of the Earth, that interacts with the Earth and interacts with the sun. It's all one living system. How they discovered it, you're gonna love this. And he says, he implies, this is an implication by the author, this is not me, YouTube, putting out false info. Nobody knows. This is speculation. But he says, think about what they did and how that might have affected our atmosphere and our climate. They discovered this plasma by exploding over 100 nukes in the atmosphere and taking measurements with satellites. So this guy, Van Allen, he worked with the Office of Naval Research that works with the CIA. These agencies require non-disclosure things and agreements, and they refuse to publish very selectively. Now this is a mind blower. I've never heard of this. This blew my mind. And this, First Amendment, please. Since 1947, all scientific work in the U.S. is subject to censor by the government as top secret with no explanation. There are 17 various intelligence agencies. So essentially, all research scientists in the country, no matter if they work for an independent laboratory or if they work for a university or they have a billionaire donor who funds them, every scientist doing research on this stuff in the country, it is implied that it's all top secret and they have to get permission from the government to publish. And therefore, we only know a part of the story. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you what this says, and then I'll tell you what I remember reading. And I can't remember if we've already talked about this or if it's coming up, but it bears repeating. So, for example, Van Allen, the belt guy, did extensive research in semiconductors, but not very much is known about his research. There's a lid on it. And this explosion of nukes in the atmosphere, this is not conspiracy theory. This was Operation Argus. The author claims that many huge nukes in the atmosphere are real culprits. The author claims. I don't want to get dinged by YouTube for false information. I'm not advocating anything. I'm simply repeating the claims of one person. You know what he believes. So Van Allen did not realize the significance of his experiments in proving the Birkeland currents and the solar plasma in space. He discovered it, but he didn't realize what it would eventually be theorized about and evolved into. But here's what happens. This is the part that isn't in this part of the book. Maybe we covered it. Maybe it's coming up. So what happens is there's basically a gag order until given permission. And scientists will write papers, they'll be published for what they've discovered. And they get the okay because nobody fully understands what it is they've stumbled onto. But as years go by, the pieces are put together and suddenly they understand the whole picture. And then the government steps in and puts a muzzle on them. But we know a little bit about the beginning research because at the beginning, nobody recognized the significance of what they discovered. And this is why we know some of this, but not nearly as much as has been researched since. In 1959, Professor Thomas Gold coined the phrase magnetosphere, including the Van Allen belts. So we're talking about a belt with magnetic properties. And he did much to advance our understanding. The third Van Allen belt was destroyed after it was discovered by NASA in 2013. Oh, he leaves that up for questioning. And the inner edge of the outer belt is actually a protective shield around us. Our planet is the solid core of a vast plasma entity that is as much a part of the Earth as the core. So there's a section here called Radiant Matter, Plasma, and Plasmoids. And I'll try very hard to understand my notes and to make it comprehensible. Winston Bostock discovered plasmoids, which are basically just a blob of plasma shaped like a sphere with a hole in the middle like a donut, or just like a blob, and they have strange properties. Lawrence Livermore lab in 1950s, created by E. Lawrence, who was Oppenheimer's best friend, and Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb. It was formed, this lab, to supplement work done at Los Alamos by the U.S. government. And this lab, Lawrence Livermore, was run by U.S. Defense and National Security. Bostock was shooting plasma into magnetic fields, and they would keep coming out at the other side as a torus, T-O-R-U-S. This is a donut shape. And he gave it a new name, plasmoid. And he didn't expect plasma to form from this shape. This was an unexpected result of his experiment. I apologize for the dogs barking. My husband went to Costco, so they're losing their minds because somebody's walking by. We usually make them be quiet. I'm not going to interrupt this. I hope it doesn't bother anybody too much. So professional. But when he discovered this plasmoid coming out the other end, he observed that it had weird behavior. And he fired two at each other and ended up with four. And then they ended up with a spiral, and the spiral turned into a pinwheel shape. And I mention here the page so that you can see exactly what it is that he was looking at. Oh, I should put my glasses on. This is a picture, a photograph of what he ended up getting. And they were all, what? They didn't know what to make of this. So it formed this weird spiral, and he called it a twirling ring with spiral arms. And he described plasmoids as self-organizing putty. Okay, they're self-organizing. They're putting themselves into shapes, and they're putting themselves into these shapes that spiral and create vortices. And we know from past reading that often comes out at the other end, double helixes. So he thought that he would apply this to galaxy formation. Okay, he's replicated this in the lab. Now he's going to see if this same phenomenon occurs in the cosmos, where they know there's plasma, and as above, so below, as below, so above. So he saw them as models of what went on in interstellar space. His bosses were looking for military uses, not cosmology. I thought that was a great sentence. They were looking for weapons. They weren't interested in the metaphysical implications. But a lot of these scientists, their minds are a little bit more open than that, and they were astounded by what they were seeing. So the government wanted to put clamps on him because he was getting too new agey for them. So they brought in 2 military scientists, and they were all disturbed to discover the plasmoid passed through copper sheets head on. They thought they would pass them through copper sheets this way. They passed them through here head on, didn't change their shape. They thought, okay, we'll pass them through them this way, and this will act like a knife and slice them in half. Didn't change their shape. And the scientist realized, oh, this is how ghosts behave. This is how angels behave. And the military guys, the military scientists were all freaked out for a different reason. They were all, what if somebody turns this into a weapon and shoots it at the White House? So you have these 2 completely opposing frames of reference, contexts for what they're seeing scientifically. Fascinating stuff, because is there really, are they really in opposition? I don't know. Maybe the motives for what they're doing. So the author learned that the earliest reports often evaded the censors, as I said. So this is where he explains that, because nobody recognized the significance of what they were discovering, and they didn't really know what to censor until it was already too late. Farther down the road, they'd go, oh, I think we kind of let the cat out of the bag a couple of years ago. Military intelligence was only interested in weapons, not in any way interested in public understanding of science, and they often held back science by decades and decades. We would be so far advanced in a lot of things if not for military government interference. Bostock was the first to suggest that plasmoids came from the sun to the earth and the solar wind. And they were so complex in behavior, he thought they could be intelligent or conscious entities. He said they acted somewhat like a computer program, that they were a communication of intelligence, so that they came carrying information. This is where my head started to hurt. So, I mean, you know how problematic my relationship with technology is. I can barely turn on a computer. I don't think it's because I'm stupid. I think it's because I'm beginning to realize from this book that we don't have enough of the true information to really come to conclusions. And what we're being expected to believe is, well, some of us resist it. So perceptive people could perceive what he was saying as inspiration. They were like, whoa, this is a whole new view of us and the universe. And the sun could be controlling the Earth's atmosphere in different ways than they thought. They said that they should redo SETI, the Society for Extraterrestrial Investigation, I think, where they try to catch radio waves, they had big dishes, and they're looking for ET to phone them. And he said they're not looking the right way. They should be looking for coded information in plasma bursts from the sun. That is probably the kind of technique that's going to be used to contact us. We need to get with it and start trying to interpret what the information is in these plasmoids. So Bostock's lab plasmoids, he said, emit signals that are too complicated to analyze, and if those are too complicated to analyze, how much more complex is the stuff coming from the sun compared to what we have in the lab, which we can't understand? Plasmoids could also turn into standing waves, like solitons. If you remember, we talked about solitons in a previous video. Now here I go trying to explain something I totally don't understand. But solitons are waves that as they move, they don't change. They don't change speed or shape. They can get bigger, but they don't change their shape. And an example would be a tsunami. That's a big example, but that's an example, and there are many, many smaller ones. In the lab, they were observing that on a human level, you could reproduce quantum phenomena in the laboratory. These phenomena were actually also happening in the galaxy, and they had documented that. In the lab, when two plasma sources were fired, the resulting plasmoids seek each other out, unite, and form a stable spiral. That thing I showed you. So this simulates the production of spiral galaxies that they've documented, and astronomical barred spirals, whatever they are. In 1957, Scientific American published the first study about all of this, and then total silence. It was cut off. Crucial information that electrons are in the center of a neon tube and are twice as hot as the sun's surface, but you can hold it in your hand. That's kind of an example of what we're talking about on a galactic level. Separate independent bodies with ordered organization and firm integrity were created in the lab, these plasmoids. And they can become more complex than our entire bodies. It's interesting. Chapter 12, Plasma Comes Alive. So this chapter will argue that dusty plasma in space has evolved life and intelligence. Stay with me. So the flame of a candle is plasma. I thought that was really interesting. It's a yellow color, is from the burning, because unburned carbon dust is rising up from the wax, and so they burn yellow. And they're more than 1,000 degrees centigrade. Yet, you can pass your finger through the flame. What's that all about? You do that as a kid, Oh, look at me. So, it's because plasma is structured in sections and the hot cells are sealed off from the cool cells, and this kind of complexity is extraordinary. So we're talking about these crystalline structures. If you remember back previously, they get together, they form these bonds, they form crystalline structures, and essentially they're little cells, little enclosures. And some of them are hot and some of them are cold. And when you go like this, for what I don't know why, through a flame, you are encountering the cold ones and not the hot ones. So they did experiments with cryogenic plasma that's so cold that it's only possible to make it in a laboratory. And they passed the plasma through liquid helium, which is very cold on the Kelvin scale. The Kelvin scale is based on absolute zero. I can't even do Fahrenheit to centigrade. It's like, I kind of equate it. I know there's no relationship, but the confusion it causes in my head, I kind of equate with time zones. I can never remember time zones, and I think don't really need to understand it. Just take it as a true thing, because this happened, that this absolute zero cold helium, and within these cryogenic plasmas there are widely varying temperatures and ranges in different areas, which is kind of an indication that you got pockets of cold and pockets of hot. And in 2005 in Japan, they found that these areas of high temperature can occur in host plasma near absolute zero. So this seemed like a contradiction. You're dealing with the ultimate cold that can only be created in a laboratory, and yet you've got these really hot pockets, and they proved it. And so he suggests, and I love this is so poetic. He said, so are we finding a patch of heaven embedded in hell? So the charged dust within plasma is very important to electronic microchip manufacturing. Too much of this dust interferes with the circuits, and they're now understanding that it involves plus or minus trillions of dollars for business. I mean, it's just really causing a problem. So science eventually discovered that planets, etc., were formed by the coagulation of dust particles. Started out as dust. Remember, man, that thou art dust, unto dust thou shalt return. Things are starting to get kind of scary here. And that all the planets are created that way in the solar dust cloud after being charged by plasma. So many scientists now believe that stars form from dust and that they form from charged dust in plasma that coagulates, becomes a dust ball, becomes what they call a protostellar core, like pre-star core, and a cloud collapses around it and you get a star. And that the sun is a cold, compressed dust ball. Whoa. So, the rings of Saturn, they now know, are charged dust. And dust forms crystals, as they know. Dust in plasma forms crystals. And those are called columns, as we know. Not columns like Doric and Ionic. Columns, C-O-L-O-U-M-S. O-U-M-B-S. Sorry, can't read my writing. So the dust in space is the same as a grain, but it's minuscule and like a rice grain, only it's minuscule. And it's a lot more solid than household dust. It's not equivalent to household dust, so that we have to get our head around that. Just as plasma is not the same as plasma in your blood. These are terms that have more than one meaning. And these grains of dust in space actually emit 20% of the luminosity of the galaxy. So the light in outer space is not just from the suns, from the stars. It's actually from the dust in the plasma. There are untold solid objects in space, too numerous to count, but they only make up 1%. Plasma is bonded entities that persist through time with the characteristics of basic life. They may compete for food from the solar winds, food energy from the solar winds. They have particles that swarm like microbes. They behave like microbes. They form organized patterns, including double helixes. And this double helix that they create carries information and energy. Complex plasma entities have contained structured plasmoids surrounded by voids, and it very much mirrors organ systems in the body surrounded by empty space. So large plasma clouds contain impurities equivalent to semiconductors that modulate current flow. Now this whole part got confusing for me. I'm going to do my best. I recommend you read this book. Anyway, it's far more complex actually than human bodies, these plasma clouds. They are intricate crystal entities that can transmit information over vast distances. And all the particles within a plasma cloud interact with each other. They can move through objects without changing form. They've seen this in quantum mechanics. And complex organized plasma structures have these features. They have the qualities of living entities. They grow, they have cellular form, they reproduce, they respond to stimuli, they have the ability to receive and process energy, but they're not carbon-based. You don't need to be carbon-based to have these factors, which are what we use in biology to define life. They're still alive. They have autonomy. They evolve. These are the principles defining life: autonomy, evolution, and what's called autopoiesis, the reproducing and maintaining of the self. So we need to start rearranging our comprehension here. So the qualities of intelligence, why do they say that they're intelligent? They're not up there in the clouds gossiping with each other. What are they talking about when they say intelligence? They have memory. They carry memory. They're able to perceive, to communicate, to model, to choose what to do, to predict, and to manipulate reality. So, the best example that we can relate to, without our heads exploding, is ball lightning. And not everyone has seen ball lightning. I've never seen it, but I'm sure I mentioned my neighbor saw it. It came down her chimney when she was a little girl. And she said it was like a little animal. It sort of skidded around and stopped and looked and skittered and went back up the chimney. So it acts intelligently. It navigates. It will be sitting in a tree, spot an aircraft, zoom after the aircraft, follow it. Does the same thing with submarines. It's able to turn at right angles and stop. It's able to move away at speed. It can roll down an aisle of an airplane and go in one end and out the other and never change its own shape. And he doesn't mention this at all in this book, but Foo Fighters, the balls, orbs that were seen by all the military during World War II. I'm just saying. He and his co-experimenter did the math, and they said that the K clouds, I call them K clouds because I can never remember the name of the guy. I want to say Krasinski, but I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. Those are the two dusty plasma clouds on either side of the Earth-Moon system. So the K clouds might be able to function as gigantic computer brains able to store and process digital information. And the math indicates that this is true. We have to take this on faith because who knows what that... okay. So the math indicates it is true that what we have is they might have potential computer power, and that the potential computer power in these huge plasmoid clouds is far greater than the potential in human brains and in all life on Earth put together by many orders of magnitude. Now I'm starting to get a headache. It's similar to the brain-like complexity of the cosmic web, only it has much greater computer potential. And remember that picture I showed you with the cosmic web on the top half and neurons in the brain on the bottom half, and the similarity was breathtaking. So the particles of dust grains in these clouds are far too small to be seen by a satellite. And they're very diffuse, far apart. This becomes an interesting fact. So we think about our bodies as being really dense, but 99% of the atoms that make up our bodies, 99% of those atoms are comprised of empty space. So if you could be the size of a cosmic dust grain and go through the body, you would see that we are mostly empty space. You have to be big enough to see, you would have to be huge to be able to see the connection between these cosmic particles and their interconnection with each other. The fact that they're so far apart, it's like we're inside something comprised of connections that are it's so huge and they're so far apart, we don't even realize that they're there and that they're connected. And yet they communicate with each other. And so these grains, they spin, they quiver, they bounce, and they create what's looked at as the energy that generates plasma waves. They're charged, they generate a lot of energy, and the energy pours into the plasma. And then they emit microwaves, they form crystals, they create structures and compartments in the plasma, and it's all electrically connected like a giant computer. Now this book, I'm glossing over, I pulled out the bare facts. He does huge explanations and cites all these different scientists and theories, and it got to where there was no way that I could synopsize it and tell the full story. So I did my best, but I feel like this bears reading several times. So this powerful interaction creates an energy called strong coupling, but they're really far apart. So all these particles that we can't even see and satellites can't even see, they can prove they're there. They know they're there. This is not even a debate anymore. And they also now know that they're strongly connected to each other, even though they're hugely far apart. It's a vast, coherent, complex, giant cloud in space, like a hugely powerful brain. Yikes. So two plasma regions can be separated by a double layer, and it can be negative one side, positive on another, and function like a sheath that protects the separation, and it keeps these regions separate in the plasma. So this was one explanation for how it's compartmentalized, and he goes into a huge explanation of it. I don't know if I really understood it. I did my best so I could narrow it down to tell you about it, but it bears reading. The human brain has more neurons in it than there are stars in the sky in a tiny shell that only does 100 years of life. Imagine the size and the age of plasma in space, and it has much higher capacity for intelligence. Chapter 13, Mysterious Case of the Dirty Gas. Okay, so we have 10 million bacteria per square centimeter on our skin. That really bears thinking about. In 2015, they discovered that these bacteria, you're going to love this, actually form clouds around the body that are as unique as a fingerprint or a retinal scan. And this cloud of bacteria around your body that is individual to each person extends several feet from your body. You are never going to make human contact again. After I heard this, I was just appalled. So the number of cells in the body totally are outnumbered by the microorganisms in and on the body by a factor of 10 to 1. For every one little microscopic cell in your body, there are 10 microbes. So we're 10% body and 90% microorganic parasites, because that's what they are. They live off of us. So he said, so I guess, we do come with baggage. So only 10% of us are in the present. 90% of us are from the past. So we emit 10 million particles per hour, or 240 million particles a day coming off of us. It's so gross. And because of our indoor and sedentary lives that we live in this dense concentration of bacteria and viruses and fungi and spores and dust and emissions from our clothes. It used to be different. People spent way more time outside. That had a positive effect. We are storing up our toxic clouds around us. So 6 feet of social distancing would keep our personal microbe clouds separate from each other. Really, microbial clouds are involved in dust. Dust contains skin, and skin contains bacteria. I think everybody knows that. It's really kind of gross. So we also have bioplasma bodies. This, to me, was the most exciting thing that I read in this book, only because of the implications it has for so much metaphysical belief and other than Western science and other than Western religion. It vindicates so much through the ages that has been dismissed and minimized and ridiculed, and that made me happy. So we have a bioplasma body. As the Earth is the core of this larger plasma around it, which then is connected to the solar wind plasma and the sun and the galaxies. Our bodies are surrounded by a little biosphere of our own, plasma. And it operates in sync with our physical body, and it interacts with the outside. It's suggested that when the body dies, this bioplasma body detaches. So is our soul plasma? And the other world is becoming part of this plasma. So the spiritual world is partly material. I mean, if it could be brought down, which is kind of, when we did the Dolores Cannon books, that was sort of what they were saying. It's a different way of looking at the same thing. Instead of saying your soul suddenly comes out of your body and moves on to this place of higher awareness, we're talking about subatomic particles that separate and have a lot of energy and intelligence and interact, and it's just a different way of looking at things. It's a way of anthropomorphizing the science. Do microbial clouds and the bioplasma around people's bodies interact with themselves? So does your plasma body interact with your microbial cloud? I think it probably shuns it socially. Or do they interact with other people's? And do microbes take the place of dust in the plasma body of clouds? And are these microbe clouds around us charged because there's dust in them? The question is, could we have, he asks this, could we have addressed our recent unfortunate microbiological event with electromagnetism? Would there have been maybe a way of, instead of working from the inside out, working from the outside in, which is a theory that Nostradamus put forward, that illness was external, manifested internally, and that if you fix the energy, you fix the body. Very interesting theory. Now, we're going to talk about something else. Heavy rain is positive, light rain is negative, and the earth has kind of an overall negative charge. So did viruses travel on charged clouds in the rain? Like polio and that kind of thing. Nobody's experimented with this. Nobody knows. This is just one of the many questions that they ask. He believes that the author, that the clouds and the cloud of microbes around us and the bioplasma around us must interact, and it needs to be investigated both in structure and content. Both need to be investigated. And he says an interesting thing to think about is that they may be negatively affected by aerosol sprays. And he suggests a new area of study to be created called electromicrobiology, where you study charges in relationship to microbes. So besides this microbial cloud, about 1/50th of our weight is bacteria, which is 10,000 times more bacteria in our body than human cells. The bacterial biomass is 1,000 times more than the human biomass on Earth. The Earth is a planet of bacteria, and we are simply functioning as bacterial support. If microbial clouds are charged and we're surrounded by these electromagnetic currents and fields, this can be beneficial or harmful to both us and to the microbes. So basically what he's saying here is that we have, we are kind, and I've said this a million times, we are kind of electronic currents or fields that we're carrying around. We are our own little electromagnetic batteries and power sources, and there's a lot of resistance to the research because they fear the results of looking at the body as an electromagnet. My husband tells me all the time, I have an electromagnetic field around me that does weird things. I think a lot of people do. Affects electronics and things like watches and pay attention to that, because I think a lot of people do. And the more you increase your psychic stuff, the more you meditate, the more you do yoga, the more you get into that and sort of waken up that field around you, because that's what you're doing. You're raising your awareness. You're increasing the frequency of your structure. That's what you want to do. And as a result of that, it affects the electromagnetic field, and things start going cockeyed. It's unbelievable. So he's saying that the body is already saying it's an electromagnet. We know that. The heart is an electromagnet. And science resisted admitting this for a long time. In the 19th century, they were all into the mechanical model, chemical reactions, and the brain's all about chemical reactions, which is not to negate that there's chemical reactions, but there's a lot more going on there. The Office of Naval Research is into all aspects of science, and it's really into this, and it's very secretive about it. Freeman Cope was a researcher, and he got his results out there because they didn't realize what he discovered. They let him publish, and then later they thought, ooh, maybe we said too much before we knew what we were saying. So he had been assigned to evaluate Reich, Wilhelm Reich, remember him, and how he was vilified? Well, guess what? This is so interesting. He had theories of this orgasmic energy called orgon, which was universal life. And of course, this was a touchy subject, pardon the pun, because, people are prudish, and he believed that it was like energy from the sun, and that this energy was not light, not electricity, not protons, but what was it then? And what was this energy from the sun? So Reich's trouble had more to do with these questions he was asking than with the sexual aspect of it. And the sexual aspect of it was a good excuse to vilify him. So he thought that all this weird energy had to do with plasma energy. And he was so controversial in a very repressed society that his plasma research was suppressed, and he died in jail. Alan Dulles, there's a name that should sound familiar. He had suppressed information on the Holocaust, allegedly, during the war, and allegedly was deeply involved in war profiteering and, what did I write here? Oh, he helped to bring Nazis to the U.S., and the CIA began as Dulles's system of getting Nazis over here. They also brought Russians. It was this authoritarian situation. He was very much an authoritarian. He ran his own foreign policy, and as this guy writes, Dulles ran his own foreign policy, and his shadow still darkens the land. Reich was arrested, his books were burned, his equipment was destroyed by the same Nazis that Alan Dulles brought here. They went after Reich when they got here. These are the Nazis that he fled when he came to the United States before the war. And they were now in the U.S. military, in the U.S. intelligence departments, in nuclear research, in security, and they went after him. So Reich was a huge threat because he knew about all these Nazis. He could identify them. He knew what their participation was in Hitler's stuff, and he knew that they were intelligence and in aerospace. So he could identify them and make it embarrassing for everybody, the government, Dulles, these institutions that hired them. So he was thrown in prison based on, this is so inappropriate, this research that he's doing. He died suddenly in prison. His papers were seized. They disappeared. But Freeman Cope got his hands on some of them from the Office of Naval Research. And Cope pursued this plasma research, and he found that we also have a cloud of gas of electromagnetic dipoles around our bodies, better known as your aura. They proved that that's true too. In 1942, a guy called Rothen discovered quantum entanglement, which is the interaction at a distance inside a body of molecules, which they've been able to show, you can do something to a molecule in one place and way far away another one will react because they're connected. So he looked at strange cosmic radiation, and the question is, was Reich also doing this? Magnetic monopoles were proven to exist, which is unusual. You think of magnets as having a positive end and a negative end. They proved that's not necessarily true. And there's still, these magnetic monopoles were proven to exist. They're still ignored. Mainstream science, physics, standard physics doesn't even go there. But they've been proven to exist. And the question is, do they exist in the K-clouds? And using this information seems to explain how Reich's orgone accumulation boxes worked. It's actually the missing link that shows that he was onto something, that this wasn't just, tachyons, which are faster than the speed of light, have been proven, and for a long time nothing was faster than the speed of light, but now they've proven they exist. And what the author says is that in physics they often theorize something a very long time before it's verified, and that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist. Oftentimes the first thing they are able to do is observe an effect, and they go, what causes that? And then they describe it mathematically. And once they can start describing things mathematically, and it happens over and over and over again, and it is consistent in its repeat of the mathematical description, then they know they're onto something. And it triggers them to start theorizing. And that's how science discovers things. And it's not that old science or status quo science is bad. It's that science is forever evolving as discoveries are made. And because nothing is being taught anymore anywhere, people are growing up who don't understand that if scientists change their minds, that doesn't mean that they were stupid. It means that they're really smart and they've discovered even more. It's a good thing, not a bad thing, to change your mind. So one of the examples of these grids of electromagnetism is an example that there's something going on is dowsing. And now they're saying, okay, well, maybe this is not just folklore. Maybe there is something electromagnetic going on. They have discovered that bees and pollen are charged electrically. Some people really do have magnetic personalities. That's how we end this chapter. And that's how I'm going to end this particular video. So that's the end of video number 3. And we'll be back here in a second with video number 4. Thank you very much for watching. And I hope you're enjoying this as much as I enjoyed this book. Love, love, love this book. It just really blows one's mind, doesn't it? Okay, I'll be back.